Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you tried everything, prayed every prayer, did everything right, and still nothing changed? You worked hard, stayed up late, worrying, tried to fix it yourself, but no matter what you did, it just wouldn't work out. You ever been there? See, life has a way of throwing problems at you that are bigger than your strength. You get hit with disappointments, unexpected bills, broken relationships, lost opportunities, things that make you feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And let me tell you something, if you try to handle it all by yourself, it will break you. But here's the good news, you don't have to, because God never meant for you to carry all that weight alone. There are some battles you weren't meant to fight. There are some problems you weren't meant to solve. There are some doors you weren't meant to open, because that's God's job. And when you learn to step back and say, God, I can't do this, but I know you can, that's when things start to change. So if you're tired, if you're frustrated, if you feel like you've done all you can and it's still not enough, then this is for you. Because I'm about to tell you why. Life may be hard, but if you let God handle it, you're going to see something bigger, better, and more powerful than you ever imagined. So stay with me, because this might just be the message that changes everything for you. Life is full of challenges. No matter who you are, where you come from, or how much you have, life will find a way to test you. Some days you'll feel like you've got everything under control, but then out of nowhere, something hits you that you never saw coming. Maybe it's a financial struggle that keeps you up at night. Maybe it's a broken relationship that leaves you feeling lost. Maybe it's the weight of responsibilities that just won't let up. And sometimes it's not just one thing, it's everything all at once. You wake up tired, you go to bed tired, and in between, you're just trying to hold it together. But here's what you need to understand. You don't have to face it alone. You were never meant to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You weren't designed to handle everything by yourself. That's why God is here. That's why he gave us his presence, his promises, and his power. Because he knew that life would get hard. He knew that some battles would be too much for us. And he never expected you to fight them alone. The problem is, we live in a world that tells us we have to be strong all the time. Society makes it seem like asking for help is a weakness. People will tell you, figure it out, push through, or just deal with it. But let's be real. Sometimes you don't have the strength to push through. Sometimes you don't have the answers. Sometimes you're doing everything you can and it's still not enough. And that's exactly when you need to stop trying to do it all yourself and start letting God take over. You see, the moment you invite God into your struggles, everything changes. It doesn't mean your problems disappear overnight, but it does mean you don't have to carry them by yourself. When you wake up in the morning feeling overwhelmed, you can say, God, I need you to handle this. When the bills keep piling up, you can say, God, I trust you to make a way. When your heart is broken and you don't know how to move forward, you can say, God, I need your peace. And let me tell you, God will show up. He will take your stress and replace it with peace. He will take your confusion and give you clarity. He will take your weakness and fill you with his strength. Think about all the times in your life when you thought you weren't going to make it, but somehow you did. That wasn't by accident. That was God carrying you through when you didn't even realize it. That was his grace, his protection, his guidance. And if he did it before, he'll do it again. But the key is, you have to let him. You have to stop trying to fix everything on your own and start trusting that he's already working things out in ways you can't see. One of the biggest mistakes we make is thinking that we have to figure everything out before we go to God. We think we have to have all the answers, have it all together, or be strong enough before we ask for help. But God isn't waiting for you to be perfect. He isn't expecting you to have it all figured out. He just wants you to come to him as you are. Tired, frustrated, confused, however you're feeling, he can handle it. So the next time life hits you with something too big to handle, Don't stress yourself out trying to fix it alone. Take a deep breath, step back, and say, God, I need you. Because when you do that, you are inviting the one who knows all things, controls all things, and can do all things into your situation. And trust me, when God steps in, things start to shift. You don't have to fight every battle by yourself. You don't have to carry the weight alone. You just have to let God handle it. Most of the stress, anxiety, and frustration we feel in life comes from one simple thing. We're trying to control too much. We try to control our future, our finances, our relationships, our careers, and even other people. We want things to go exactly the way we plan, and when they don't, we panic. We get frustrated. We start thinking, why isn't this working out? Why isn't this happening for me? But the truth is, you were never meant to control everything. Some things are simply beyond your power. And the more you try to control what's out of your hands, the more exhausted and overwhelmed you become. Life is unpredictable. One moment everything seems fine, and the next you're dealing with something you never saw coming. Maybe it's a job loss, a betrayal, a financial crisis, or a sudden change in your plans. And what do? We scramble, we stress, we try to fix it ourselves, but here's the hard truth. Some battles are not yours to fight. Some situations are not for you to figure out. They belong to God. And when you stop trying to force things and start trusting Him, that's when real peace comes. Think about all the times you worried yourself sick over something that in the end worked itself out. You lost sleep. You stressed out. You overthought every little detail, only to realize later that God had it under control the whole time. So why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep trying to handle everything by ourselves when God is saying, let me take care of it? Because we think if we don't do it, it won't get done. We think if we don't push, pull, and stress over it, things won't happen. But that's not how God works. God doesn't need your worry. He needs your trust. When you let go of control, you make room for God to move. As long as you're trying to fix everything, you're blocking Him from stepping in. But when you say, God, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I trust you, that's when miracles happen. That's when doors open that you never could have opened yourself. That's when situations turn around in ways you never expected. But you got to stop trying to do His job and let Him handle it. You may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but you have to believe that God sees the bigger picture. You only see what's in front of you, but He sees the whole story. You're stressed about what's not happening, but He knows exactly when and how it needs to happen. When you truly understand that, you stop fighting for control. You stop forcing things that aren't meant for you. You stop chasing after things that were never supposed to be yours, and instead you rest in the fact that God's plan is always better than your plan. Letting go doesn't mean you stop trying. It doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. It means you do your part, you take the necessary steps, but then you leave the results to God. You trust that even if things don't go your way, they are still going the right way. Because at the end of the day, your life is not in your hands, it's in His. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you will find peace. So if you've been fighting, stressing, and trying to control everything, it's time to let go. It's time to stop trying to figure it all out on your own. It's time to stop holding on so tightly to something that was never meant to be yours in the first place. Surrender it to God, let Him take over, and watch how things start to change. Because when you trust Him, when you stop forcing and start believing, you'll realize that life is a whole lot easier when you let God handle what you were never meant to carry. Fear is one of the biggest reasons we struggle to let God handle things. When life gets hard, when things don't go as planned, when we face situations that feel too big for us, fear starts creeping in. It whispers doubts in our minds. It makes us question if things will ever get better. It convinces us that if we don't take control, everything will fall apart. Fear makes us think that trusting God is risky, but the truth is, trusting God is the safest thing you can do. Think about it. How many times has fear held you back? How many times have you stayed up at night worrying about something that never even happened? How many times have you been afraid to take a step forward because you weren't sure how things would work out? Fear will paralyze you if you let it. It will keep you stuck in situations that God is trying to pull you out of. It will make you doubt his promises and question his plans. But here's what you need to know. Fear is a lie. Fear tells you that you're alone, but God says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Fear tells you that things will never change, but God says, I have plans to give you hope and a future. Fear tells you that you're not strong enough, but God says, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. See, fear will always try to make your problems look bigger than God. It will make you focus on what's going wrong instead of what God is doing. It will make you forget every time he has come through for you in the past. But here's what you need to do. Stop feeding your fear and start feeding your faith. Faith and fear cannot exist in the same space. You either trust that God is in control or you let fear control you. You can't do both. You have to make a decision. Will you let fear run your life, or will you stand in faith and trust that God is working things out? Because the moment you choose faith over fear, everything shifts. It doesn't mean life gets easy. It doesn't mean you'll never have doubts again, but it does mean that instead of being controlled by your circumstances, you will be anchored in the truth that God is bigger than anything. Let me tell you something. God has already gone before you. He already knows how things will work out. He already has the solution to your problem before you even knew there was a problem. And the enemy knows that too. That's why he uses fear against you. He knows that if he can make you afraid, he can stop you from stepping into what God has for you. He knows that if he can make you doubt, he can delay your blessing. But when you refuse to let fear win, when you stand firm and say, God, I trust you no matter what, that's when miracles start happening. You might be looking at a situation right now that seems impossible. You might be facing something that makes you feel completely out of control. And maybe fear is trying to convince you that there's no way out. But let me remind you, God is bigger than your problem. He is bigger than your fear. He is bigger than any obstacle in your way. And when you let go of fear and put your trust in him, you will see things shift in ways you never imagined. So the next time fear tries to creep in, the next time doubt tries to take over, the next time you feel like things are falling apart, remember this: God is in control. You don't have to know how everything will work out. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust the one who does. Because when you let go of fear and hold on to faith, you'll realize that God has been handling it all along. Patience is one of the hardest things for us to practice, especially when we're going through tough times, when we're hurting, struggling, or waiting for a breakthrough. We want answers now. We want God to fix it right away. But here's what we need to understand. God's timing is not our timing. He doesn't work on our schedule. He doesn't always give us what we want exactly when we want it. And that can be frustrating. It can feel like he's not listening or that he's forgotten about us. But the truth is, God is never late. He is always right on time. Think about it. How many times have you been in a situation where you felt like nothing was happening, like God wasn't moving fast enough? You prayed, you waited, you tried to stay strong, but nothing changed. And then, when you least expected it, everything came together. The door opened, the opportunity showed up, the situation turned around. And when you look back, you realize if it had happened any sooner, you wouldn't have been ready for it. See, God isn't just preparing the blessing for you, he's preparing you for the blessing. Sometimes what looks like a delay is really divine protection. You might think you're ready for something, but God sees the bigger picture. He knows what's coming. He knows what you need to learn first. He knows what's best for you. And sometimes he's saying, not yet, because I have something better. But instead of trusting him, we get impatient. We try to force things to happen. We rush into decisions. We take matters into our own hands. And that's when we mess things up. Look at what happens when people in the Bible tried to rush God's timing. Abraham and Sarah were promised a child, but instead of waiting on God, they tried to make it happen on their own. And it caused a whole lot of unnecessary trouble. The Israelites were promised the promised land, but their impatience and lack of trust kept them wandering in the desert for 40 years. Over and over again, we see that when people try to rush ahead of God, they end up making things harder for themselves. And the same thing happens to us. God's plan for your life is perfect, but if you try to move ahead of him, you might miss the best part. You might settle for something less than what he intended for you. You might walk into a situation that you're not spiritually or emotionally prepared for. And then when things don't work out, you'll wonder why it's so hard. But the truth is, the struggle often comes from stepping outside of God's timing. When you learn to trust his timing, you find peace. You stop stressing about when things will happen and start focusing on what he's teaching you right now. You start seeing delays as opportunities instead of obstacles. You start feeling frustrated and start feeling expectant, because you know that when God does move, it's going to be better than anything you could have arranged for yourself. So if you're waiting on something right now, if you're in a season where it feels like nothing is happening, don't get discouraged. Don't start doubting. Don't let impatience make you move ahead of God. Instead, remind yourself that every delay has a purpose. Every moment of waiting is shaping you. Every time you feel like giving up, remember that God is still working behind the scenes. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. God's timing is perfect even when it doesn't feel like it. He knows what you need and when you need it. So instead of worrying, instead of trying to force things, instead of doubting his plan, do this. Trust him. Trust that he hasn't forgotten about you. Trust that your breakthrough is coming at the right time. Trust that everything is falling into place exactly as it should. Because when you do, you'll realize that waiting on God is never a waste of time. It's a setup for something greater than you could have ever imagined. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to keep your faith strong when life is falling apart. When you're struggling, when you're hurting, when things aren't going your way, it's easy to feel like giving up. It's easy to wonder if God is really there, if he really cares, if he's really working on your behalf. But that's exactly when you need to hold on to your faith the most. See, faith isn't just about believing when things are good. It's about believing even when things are hard. Faith is trusting God when you don't understand what's happening. It's believing in his promises even when your situation looks hopeless. It's standing firm and saying, God, I don't see the way, but I know you have one. I don't know the plan, but I know you do. Because the truth is, your faith is what will carry you through the hardest seasons of your life. Think about it. Every time you've gone through something difficult, every time you thought you weren't going to make it, somehow you did. Somehow God made a way. Somehow things turned around. It may not have happened the way you expected. It may not have been on your timing, but God never failed you. And if he didn't fail you before, what makes you think he's going to start now? The enemy wants you to doubt. He wants you to believe that God has forgotten about you. He wants you to focus on your problems instead of on God's power. He knows that if he can weaken your faith, he can weaken your hope. But here's what you need to know. Your faith is stronger than your fears. Your faith is bigger than your obstacles. Your faith is what will push you forward when everything else is trying to hold you back. When you feel like giving up, remind yourself why you started. Remind yourself of the times God has already brought you through. Remind yourself that he is still in control, because when you keep your faith, even in the hardest moments, that's when miracles happen. That's when doors open. That's when things start to shift in ways you never expected. Let me tell you something. God is not ignoring you. He sees your struggles. He sees your pain. He sees what you're going through. And he's not going to leave you in it. But sometimes he allows us to go through challenges because he knows that's where our faith grows. See, if everything was easy, if you never had to struggle, you wouldn't need faith. Faith is built in the hard times. Faith is strengthened when you have no choice but to trust God. The Bible says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Why? Because faith is what keeps us connected to him. Faith is what reminds us that no matter how bad things look, there is always hope. And when you hold on to your faith, when you keep believing, when you refuse to let doubt take over, you will see God move in ways you never imagined. Maybe you're facing something right now that seems impossible. Maybe you've been praying for something, but nothing is changing. Maybe you're tired, frustrated, and ready to give up. But let me tell you, this is not the time to quit. This is the time to believe even harder. This is the time to declare that God is still in control. This is the time to hold on to your faith like never before. Because here's the truth. Storms don't last forever. Pain doesn't last forever. Struggles don't last forever. But God's promises do. His love does. His power does. And if you just keep your faith, if you keep trusting him even when it's hard, you will come out on the other side stronger, wiser, and better than you were before. So don't let your faith waver just because life gets tough. Don't let doubt win. Don't let fear take over. Stand firm. Hold on. Keep believing, because the same God who brought you through before will bring you through again. And when you look back, you'll realize that your faith was the very thing that carried you through. One of the biggest mistakes we make is thinking we have to handle everything on our own. We carry burdens that are too heavy. We stress over things we can't control, and we wear ourselves out trying to fix everything. But let me tell you something. You were never meant to do it all by yourself. God didn't create you to struggle alone. He didn't put you here so you could fight battles in your own strength. That's why he says, cast all your cares on me because I care for you. See, we get so caught up in trying to figure everything out that we forget God already has it figured out. We try to fix problems that only he can fix. We try to change things that only he can change. And in the process, we end up exhausted, frustrated, and overwhelmed. But here's the truth. When you surrender to God, when you say, Lord, I can't do this on my own, I need you to take over, that's when things start to shift. That's when peace replaces anxiety. That's when hope replaces fear. That's when you stop feeling like you're drowning and start realizing that God is holding you up. Surrender doesn't mean you stop trying. It doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. It means you stop worrying and start trusting. It means you stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and start believing that God is in control. See, the enemy wants you to feel overwhelmed. He wants you to believe that if you don't figure it out, nothing will change. He wants you to think that you're alone in this. But that's a lie. You are not alone. God is with you, and he is waiting for you to let go so he can step in. Think about a child trying to tie their shoelaces for the first time. They struggle, they get frustrated, they make a mess of the laces, and their parent is standing right there ready to help. But the child insists, no, I got it, I can do it myself. Meanwhile, they're making things worse. That's exactly how we are with God. we're tangled up in problems trying to fix things our way, while God is right there saying, if you would just let me handle this, everything would be so much easier. So why do we hold on so tight? Why do we try to control things that are out of our hands? It's because we don't like the feeling of not being in control. We don't like the unknown. We don't like waiting. But let me ask you this, has worrying ever fixed anything? Has stressing ever made things better? Has trying to handle everything on your own ever brought you peace? No, because that's not how God designed you to live. The moment you surrender, the moment you truly say, God, I trust you with this, that's when everything starts to change. That's when you start feeling lighter. That's when you start seeing doors open that you couldn't open on your own. That's when you start experiencing peace in the middle of chaos, joy in the middle of uncertainty, and strength when you should be weak. Maybe you're going through something right now that feels impossible. Maybe you've been holding on to stress, fear, or pain for too long. Maybe you've been trying to figure out how to fix a situation that seems unfixable. I'm here to tell you, let it go. Give it to God. Surrender it. Stop trying to carry what He already promised to carry for you. Because here's what happens when you surrender. You make room for God to move. You step aside so He can step in. You stop trying to force things and allow Him to orchestrate things. And when God moves, He moves in ways you never could have imagined. So whatever is weighing you down today, whatever is keeping you up at night, whatever is making you feel like you're losing control, release it. Pray about it, give it to God, and then trust that He's working it out. Stop carrying what He's already promised to carry. Stop stressing about what He's already taken care of. Stop living in fear when He's already made a way. Because the moment you surrender, that's the moment you'll finally feel free.